Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hello. I have a few convoluted questions I'd like to ask. It's something I've been mulling over for a number of weeks with various bits and pieces of data, but none of which have really pointed me to a solid conclusion. I've been intrigued to uncover any correlation between type and sense of humor, and these have been my findings. My brother, an ISTJ, and myself, an INTJ, have a pretty similar sense of humor. We loved the first 10 years of The Simpsons, How I Met Your Mother, Frasier, Friends, The Office, stand-up comedians like Louis C.K. and Eddie Izzard. My friend, an ENFJ, likes similar things to my brother and I, but she tends to like things a little bit more morbid, a little bit darker, and maybe even a little bit of toilet humor in there. I like it, but it's not my go-to. My dad, an ESTJ, likes frat boy type of humor. 40-year-old virgin, 2.5 men, jackass, stuff like that. My mentor, an ISTJ, loves Monty Python. I'm at a loss. So here are my questions. We all know your guys' types. But what type of stuff do you find funny? What correlation do you find with type and style of humor? And my last question would be, does the placement or the function determine our sense of humor? For example, does my sense of humor come from my introverted intuition, or because my introverted intuition is my dominant function? For other people, would it come from their secondary, tertiary, or inferior? What do you guys think? Thank you so much. Love the podcast.
Thanks, Joseph, for the question. I don't think you're wrong. I think there's a big challenge connecting style of humor to personality type. I think it's, we look at the 16 personality types in the Myers-Briggs system as the starting place where we have commonalities to actually see all the differences we bring as humans. It's not that 8 billion people can be brought down to 16 types. It's that there's these 16 categories that show just how uniquely wired we all are. And I think humor is that. Humor is a very subjective, personal experience that probably has to do a lot with your generation, your upbringing, the way your childhood developed, the things your family thought were funny and the way you wired your mind to those things. There are probably trends, but I think it's a challenging subject to address. And I don't think it's as cut and dry as, all humor comes from your tertiary or 10-year-old, or all humor is based on your co-pilot, and if you're an introvert, this shows up, and if you're extrovert, this shows up. I don't think you can do that as cleanly. But there probably are some trends and tendencies, and we can certainly talk about how we experience humor, myself and Antonia personally, and maybe draw some, patterns and maybe some starting points to go think about this in your own life as you're listening.
Yeah, I do agree that humor is going to be an emergent of a system running. And definitely, you mentioned generation. I think generation is a big one. Like we have certain experiences throughout our lives and cultures, like our cultural experiences that will color what our expectations are. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. But if type does come in here, first of all, I haven't really done any research on this, and I'm going to have to spitball on this one. This is going to be just, like you said, Joel, just maybe some patterns. But I think I have noticed, because I've found this to be an interesting question as well, even though I don't really have any, I don't have any hard data behind it. But I have considered that when trying to deconstruct my own sense of humor, there are certain things that I've found that are very consistent. The first one is I enjoy going meta on things. I enjoy when things are pointed out through particularly absurdity. So I really love things being absurd and different than we expect them to be. And I think on some level it's because I believe everything is absurd. I see the absurdity in almost everything. Like when I do my laundry, I find it absurd that I grab a bunch of, like these atoms that are constructed in certain ways to create clothes. And atoms are basically just little whirling balls of energy. And I grab this collection of whirling balls of energy and I take them down steps, which are other whirling balls of energy. And then I shove them into the washer, which is basically just more energy, concentrated forms of energy. And then when I'm done, I fold them up nicely and I take them back upstairs. It's like this whole thing, if I look at it really, really, really meta, is totally absurd, this action that I'm taking. And if you were to just look at them as collections of atoms, I'm just pushing atoms around. And that's basically all life is just shoving and pushing atoms around.
Yeah.
So I see life as very absurd. And I personally think that we take life way too seriously, way, way, way too seriously. So when something is able to point out that absurdity in a way that is satisfying, I find that very funny.
Somebody named Adam is listening right now going, yeah, life is about pushing me around. That's right. It's all my experience has been.
Oh,
I would say two words that come up for me when I think about humor are intelligence and pain. You know, Carol Burnett has this, well, it's been attributed to her. I don't know if she said it, and I might be completely butchering the quote and paraphrasing it, but something to the effect of, you know, humor is pain plus time, often is how she expressed it. She's a famous comedian, and that's really been something that I've seen in my life is when I find something funny, usually at the etymology, the starting place, there's some sort of pain or trauma that's associated with the starting place of that humor. And then the second word, intelligence, I think that there is somewhat of a intelligence requirement to find something funny. I think, you know, when we have a small child that's not developed yet and you try to make a joke, a sophisticated joke, they're not going to laugh because they don't have enough reference experiences, life experiences, and just raw intelligence to process the joke, to understand, oh, you're not being serious, you're joking. Kids take things very serious and at face value. And so there's a maturity and intelligence aspect to humor as well.
Now, that's a really interesting point, actually. So the first thing you said was pain. And I think that humor is very much a coping mechanism to deal with pain. In fact, when people get in trouble for making jokes around things that are quote unquote serious topics that have pain in them, I always wonder why it's not immediately obvious that the joke is an attempt to deal with the pain. Like it's a coping mechanism to deal with it. And it's actually a very effective coping mechanism. So that's the first thing. And I do think a lot of humor is rooted in pain. I don't think all of it is, but I think a lot of it is. The second idea is around intelligence, and I wonder if that is in some ways or how one could bridge this idea of type and humor in the sense that type, to some extent, diagnoses what we're going to have higher talent of intelligence around. Like, where do our intelligences live? Now, if you're an IQ purist and believe that there's only one real form of intelligence, and that's analytical intelligence, this won't really resonate with you. But there are...
Well, you're just wrong, though.
Even though I like to think that I would benefit from that society, I also know that there are a lot of ways in which I'm not intelligent, and so I have to keep that well in mind. So there's all these different styles of intelligence, and like you said, it's required for humor. You've got to kind of see the wryness in it, or you have to be able to simultaneously hold different thoughts in your head to be able to sort of understand what is happening in front of you and why it is, on some level, going meta on itself.
Well, and I think that lends the ability to see other things that are humorous that you don't personally find humorous. You kind of get why they are abstractly.
Yeah.
Right? Like I watched the movie The Graduate from the 60s. I know it's supposed to be funny to a boomer culture. I don't find it funny, but I have enough meta perspective to understand that this is supposed to be funny, and it is funny to a certain set of people.
Yeah, especially if you have the references and you understand how it was relevant in the time. Oh, I was going to say the other thing I find really funny is not just things that are absurd, but also referential humor. And I do believe that there is an association with referential humor and introverted sensing or memory, or at least there is for me, even though it's my 3-year-old or inferior function. I build intimacy with people through referential humor. Like, we've experienced things together. We saw the same media. We were at this situation at the same time and watched something go down, and now we can banter around that, and there's a connection point there. So I'm big into referential humor as well, which I do think has some association with that function.
Yeah, and probably the principle or the idea I would posit and explore, if we had more time to talk about it, is I bet you there's a style of humor that each of our cognitive functions appreciates the most, that other functions and other people can understand, but it's the province of that humor. I think about my mom, who's an INFJ. She loves what I'll call Beth Moore humor, quote unquote. Beth Moore is an evangelical leader in the church, evangelical background I came from. It's very extroverted feeling, harmony style humor. It's all about, it's almost like Southern in its flavoring. It's kind of like, honey, you know how your husband does such and such around the house. And it's like all very stereotypical gender stereotypes and stuff. And it like makes sense to my mom because that's kind of the culture she came from. And I get the humor. I understand where it's supposed to be funny. I don't personally find it as funny. Just like I watch a Jackass movie and people getting kicked in the crotch. Like there's a certain, I think, STP culture, probably SC, extroverted sensing or sensation, that finds that style humor funny. I don't find it funny, but I understand why they find it funny.
Yeah, I think extroverted feeling or harmony really likes it when people make social faux pas that they should have known better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you have somebody that's part of a culture and there's a bunch of things that are supposed to be known in that culture, and then you tell a humorous tale about somebody not, like maybe even circumstantially not being able to follow that culture, that can be I think that's very funny. And there is crossover here. Like one of my favorite shows is Rick and Morty, which to me is a very NTP show.
Oh, yeah.
And it's maybe one of my favorite shows of all time, honestly. Very funny. Almost every episode kills me. And my brother, who's an ENTJ or has ENTJ preferences, also loves Rick and Morty. There's a ton of crossover there. I still think it is more NTP humor, but he probably, if he knew type and cared about it at all, probably would argue that it's more NTJ humor. And I think there is an appreciation of each other's style to some extent. So I don't know if we can, like certain styles of humor are owned by certain functions or owned by certain personality types. I do think there's crossover. I do think there are a bit more nodes in the system. But I also think that there are certain things that strike us in a certain way, right? Like that just hits our funny bone probably because of how we're cognitively wired. And, the question of, is it not just the functions, but also where they live? It's entirely possible that because introverted sensing or memory is my inferior function, referential humor has more sentimentality for me. Like I'm sentimental around it. And I don't know if somebody who has introverted sensing or memory as a dominant function or as a driver would be as sentimental. They might just enjoy it. So there probably is something to be said for the position as well, particularly because of its, our personal relationship with that function.
I will, as we wrap up, I do have to lament something that the industry, the world that we float in, Antonia, the personal growth world, I have noticed is a very humorless place from my experience. It feels like when people start doing personal growth and they level up in their lives, they lose their sense of humor. And I feel it's very sad. I don't want to ever lose my sense of humor. I feel like it's a way for me to go meta. It's a way for me to see the silliness in my own life. It's a way for me to connect with other people. I believe it's a humbling experience. There's so much value that comes from humor. I don't know why in our industry, when I look around, people are so seriously minded and they can't laugh about absurd things or silly things, or it's very safe humor in a lot of ways. And it's probably also happening in the world at large. I feel like humor is starting to fade from us. Like we've lost some of this, and I feel like it's a deficiency. I feel like we're losing something important if humor goes away.
Well, it's a coping mechanism. It really is. And I think in some ways, that's one of the reasons why humor is attacked. It's because this is a legitimate way to relieve pressure around painful circumstances. And I think that there is something to be said for people not wanting that pressure relief because they want people to feel motivated to make change. And so it's in some ways an enemy. And I think that's sad too.
Well, it's also an enemy in the court jester nature of it. If a comedian or somebody points out the absurdity or silliness of something that everybody takes really seriously, that can feel undermining and like you're being made fun of rather than being calibrated.
Right. Yeah. Or that you're going to lose credibility because somebody made a joke.
Yeah.
And I think humor is incredibly important. In fact, I think we undervalue how important it is. And I would agree with what you're saying. I mean, in personal growth world, that's kind of how I vet the people I'm going to be following, is whether or not they have a sense of humor. If they don't, it means that they probably have a lot of blind spots because they're not able to self-reflect and go meta on themselves. So if a person is providing a lot of information, but they don't have a sense of humor around what they're talking about, I have a hard time hearing anything else they're saying.
Yeah. We'd love to hear what you think about humor. If you want to make a comment directly below this episode, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you, Joseph, for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.